Let's talk about science. Or should I more appropriately say, let's talk about NASA, which really isn't science. You guys know I like to every so often go through and just kind of read some articles produced by NASA and these other space related agencies. I kind of like to see what they're up to. So let's do it. So I have an article here entitled, What Happens If Someone Dies in Space? I mean, have you ever asked yourself that question, guys? Like, what do you do if someone just dies in space? Like, that would pose a problem for, like, all the other astronauts. Imagine you're up there, you're all crammed in, like the ISS or some weird space shuttle or like a capsule, and one of your fucking cosmonauts, one of your fellow astronauts, kicks the bucket on you. What do you do? Like, are there protocols in place for such a thing? Well, guess what? Apparently there are. NASA's got it all figured out. Why don't we read about it? There's no question that sending human beings to space is an extraordinarily difficult and perilous proposition. Since human space exploration began just over 60 years ago. 60 years ago, peeps. Anyway, 20 people have died. So, hashtag science is telling us that 20 people have died in space. 14 in the NASA Space Shuttle tragedies of 86 and 2003, which is funny because I forgot about the 2003 tragedy. I think it was like they said there was a problem with the heat shield upon re-entry. I don't know. And we all remember the Challenger. So 20 people have died. 14 in the NASA Space Shuttle tragedies and 3 cosmonauts during the 1971 Soyuz 11 mission. And how could we forget the 3 astronauts that died in the Apollo 1 launch pad fire in 67? You guys remember that? In 1967, where we had those 3 Apollo 1 astronauts die on the launch pad? You guys remember that one. Gus Grissom was one of them. They were the 3 astronauts that were supposed to go to the moon. Because remember, guys, it wasn't supposed to be Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and the third guy, whatever his name fucking was. Collins. I think his name was Collins. Anyway, there was like 3 original guys that were supposed to go to the moon, led by Gus Grissom. But they didn't even make it off the launch pad of Apollo 1. They burned up in a tragic fire, do you remember? I mean, I'm sure there was no coincidence involved because just a short time earlier, Gus Grissom went to the media and spoke out and said, there's no fucking way we're going to the moon. Not in that shit that they're trying to send us up in. He took one look at the LEM, the lunar module that's supposed to drop them down onto the moon's surface and then propel them back up to the craft. He took one look at it and said he fucking laughed at it. And apparently he even took it a step further. He hung a lemon on the LEM, which is the module that brings them down to the lunar surface. You know, like when you buy a car, that's a piece of shit. It's called a lemon. Yeah. He basically said there's no way they're going to get onto the surface of the moon with this fucking bullshit technology that they were presenting to everybody. And guess what happened? Whoopsie! They fucking torched his ass in a pad fire right in the middle of that Apollo 1 launch fucking capsule. Yep. They burned him alive. And the 2 other suckers who were fucking unfortunate enough to be along for that fucking trip. That never happened. Sorry, Gus. So, yeah, we have to include him amongst the 20 people that died. Although they didn't die in space. They were just part of space exploration. Hey, guys, I'm going to give you a hint. Nobody's died in space. You know why? Because nobody's been to space. Oops, did I just say that? I don't know. Yeah, so 20 people have died in space exploration. Which, guys, like, let's really think about it. That's an exceedingly low number. Look how many people have already died just trying to, go down and visit the Titanic wreckage. Look how many people have died, like, trying to climb Mount Everest. Look how many people have died with just regular exploration of the oceans and the seas. But only 20 people have died in space exploration. Yeah, okay. Let's keep going. Given how complicated human spaceflight is, it's actually remarkable how few people have lost their lives so far. Oh, isn't that what Z just said? It is kind of remarkable. A little bit too remarkable. It actually strains credibility and credulity, but let's continue. But NASA's plans to send a crew to the moon in 2025 and astronauts to Mars in the next decade. Right. So we're going to be on the moon again in 2025. You guys realize it's like a year and a half, 2 years at the most? Okay. And you're going to be on Mars in the next decade? Right. Let's continue. It says commercial spaceflight is becoming routine. Right. So they're still going to tell you it's spaceflight when Jeff Bezos goes up there, apparently 62 or 63 miles up, which even hashtag science and Neil deGrasse Tyson admits is not actual spaceflight. How's it spaceflight if you haven't gone in zero-G gravity? How's it spaceflight if you don't have to return through the thermosphere and you don't need heat shields? How's it spaceflight? Just because you can go up really high in the air doesn't mean you're in space. So they just keep saying commercial spaceflight is routine, right? Oh, okay, maybe they're talking about SpaceX, that apparently is doing frequent trips to the ISS. Not only shuttling cargo, but actual humans, men and women, astronauts. Anyway, let's continue. As space travel becomes more common, so does the possibility that somebody might die along the way. Of course. It brings to mind a gloomy but necessary question to ask. If someone dies in space, what happens to the body? Right. I don't know. I mean, I've seen Star Trek, the movies. You remember when Spock died, guys? What did they do in space? They did kind of like a sea burial. They just kind of let his body just like float out one of the back hatches and he just drifted off. I mean, let me put it like this, guys. If I were an astronaut and I died in space, I'd want the Spock funeral. Why can't you give the astronauts the Spock funeral in space? It seemed nice. It was like a Viking funeral, but I don't know, in zero-G. Wouldn't that be a cool way to die? If I were an astronaut, that's what I would want. But no, they have this whole other protocol. They got to bring him back to Earth for some reason. Let me continue. Death on the moon and Mars. As a space medical doctor who works to find new ways to keep astronauts healthy, I and my team at the Translational Research Institute for Space Health want to make sure space explorers are as healthy as they can be for space missions. Right. So this guy who wrote this article has the balls to refer to himself as a space medical doctor. And he actually works for an institute called the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. I want you guys to think about this. This is a real doctor who's getting paid real money to work at a fake institute for fake space. And like I was talking about yesterday, we still have kids sick and dying all over this world, but we're paying this clown fucking idiot moron who probably has the IQ of a fucking rhesus monkey to fucking pretend and walk around like he's a space medical doctor, which means he does absolutely nothing because there is no space, guys. Sorry to break it to you. So we're paying not only this doctor with your tax money and mine to pretend he's a medical. He probably thinks he's a real space doctor, by the way. We're not only paying him, we're paying the entire Translational Research Institute for Space Health. What a clown world, guys. So this guy who thinks he's a fucking space doctor gets to show up at the local family reunion and tell all his family, I'm a space medical doctor. You know? And then one of his fucking family members has to come on here and tell me, fuck you, Z. Of course space is real. Here's how death in space would be handled today. If someone died on a low Earth orbit mission, such as aboard the International Space Station, the crew could return the body to Earth in a capsule within a matter of hours. Well, that's cool. So it seems like they have a capsule ready to go that they could just jettison out and it somehow return to Earth. I don't know. It's weird. Is that what kind of capsule is it? Is that the capsule they use to kind of come back to Earth when they're done with their missions? Is that the capsule they use to return like their bags of shit? Because they have to shit when they're up there, guys. What do? Do they jettison the shit into space? I don't know. So anyway, apparently if you're on the ISS, there's a capsule that could bring the body back within hours. Let's continue. If it happened on the moon, the crew could return home with the body in just a few days. NASA already has detailed protocols in place for such an event. Because of that quick return, it's likely that preservation of the body would not be NASA's major concern. Instead, the number one priority would be making sure the remaining crew returns safely to Earth, right? So imagine, you're coming back from the moon on your new Artemis mission, which apparently is going to happen in 2025. Somebody decides to kick the bucket, and now your whole way back, you got to fucking sit next to a corpse in a body bag. Yeah, I'm sure that would be fun. What happened in my story? Here it is. Let's continue. But, of course, things would be different if an astronaut died during the trip to Mars. Guys, think about it. There's people that are getting paid real money to fucking come up with these scenarios. What a clown world. But yet we can't put out Canadian forest fires. In the Mars death scenario, the crew probably wouldn't be able to turn around and go back. So we can't just turn around and go back. So instead, the body would likely return to Earth along with the crew at the end of the mission. What would be a couple of years later, right? Because these Mars missions have to be years long. In the meantime, the crew would presumably preserve the body in a separate chamber or specialized body bag. Right. So we're going to take up valuable space on this Mars, whatever the spacecraft is, to store a dead body. Even though they don't even do it on the seas. If you're like, I don't know, like in an old-timey sailing vessel, they don't even bring you home when you're on Earth in the ocean. They just have a little ceremony and dump your ass overboard. Like I said, in space, you think it'd be the same thing. Like the Spock burial. But no, these idiots say we got to bring the body back. They're going to preserve the body for years on end in a specialized body bag to bring it back. No, they wouldn't, guys. You know they wouldn't. I know they wouldn't. And all rational thinking people know they wouldn't. If you're on Mars and you fucking died, they would just leave your fucking ass there. If you're in space and you fucking died, they would just jettison your ass out and give you the Spock burial. They're a bunch of fucking liars. And here's why they give you these articles, everybody, because as they're engaging everybody in these articles about what they would do with a dead body in space, you're just being programmed, because you're not realized as you're engaged in this story about bodies, you're not aware that they're just presenting the set and setting of space, which you're just going to incorporate into your subconscious as a belief in space. This is how programming works and conditioning. If you can't see it, I can't help you. Let me continue. About the body bag and coming back from Mars. The steady temperature and humidity inside the space vehicle would theoretically help preserve the body. Really? So you're telling me a temperature, of room temperature and humidity preserves bodies? No, it doesn't. Let's keep going. But all those scenarios would apply only if someone died in a pressurized environment, like a space station or a spacecraft. What would happen if somebody stepped outside into space without the protection of a spacesuit? The astronaut would die almost instantly. The loss of pressure and the exposure to the vacuum of space would make it impossible for the astronaut to breathe, and blood and other body fluids would boil. Right. So they're consistently telling us about the fucking vacuum of space and that how your blood and your body fluids would boil. Right. But why do we hear stories about guys in space that have water filling up their helmet and they're drowning in space? I don't know. So is space a fluid or is it a vacuum? Make your minds up. I don't know. Let's continue. What would happen if an astronaut stepped out onto the moon or Mars without a spacesuit? The moon has nearly no atmosphere, a very tiny amount. Mars has a very thin atmosphere and almost no oxygen. Oh, that's funny because they're telling me on one hand here that Mars has a very thin atmosphere. But I read other articles that tell me they have helicopters on Mars. Well, I don't know. So it makes me think, I go, well, they have helicopters on Earth, but they can't fly helicopters on Earth in thin atmospheres. You can't even get a helicopter to the top of Everest because the atmosphere is too thin for the blades to fucking do anything. You get it, guys? Helicopter blades have no lift in a very thin atmosphere. They tell me they can't even have helicopters in the deserts at sea level because it's so hot and the atmosphere becomes too thin in the heat. Okay. So when the atmosphere becomes thin here on Earth, you can't even have a helicopter. But apparently, in the very thin atmosphere of Mars, you have helicopters. I don't know. Something's not adding up here. Let me continue. So the result would be about the same as exposure to open space, suffocation, and boiling blood. Right. So basically saying if your fucking space helmet cracks, you're shit out of luck. And here we go. What about burial? Suppose an astronaut died after landing on the surface of Mars. Cremation isn't desirable. How could you cremate somebody in low Earth, in low oxygen environment? You just told me that it has almost no oxygen on. Okay, let me ask you. So if Mars has a very thin atmosphere and it has almost no oxygen, how could you even explore the idea of cremation? Anyway, let's continue. And burial isn't a good idea either, because bacteria and other organisms from the body could contaminate the Martian surface. Okay, so you're not concerned about having humans bouncing around up there on the surface of Mars as they're going to be building colonies, apparently. You're not concerned about sending these probes there and these rovers and these helicopters. You're not concerned about the bacteria and organisms there. But God forbid if we buried somebody there, we would contaminate the Martian surface. Yeah, right. Continue. Instead, the crew would likely preserve the body in a specialized body bag so it could be returned to Earth. Right. Unbelievable. There are still many unknowns about how explorers would deal with the death. It's not just a question of what to do with the body. Helping the crew deal with the loss and helping the grieving families back on Earth are just as important as handling the remains of the person who died. But to truly colonize other worlds, whether the moon, Mars, or a planet outside our solar system, this grim scenario would require planning and protocols. No, it wouldn't. You would just get rid of the body. Like I said, when you had all these armadas exploring the world in the 14 and 1500s, and even now, they just dumped the body. Apparently, they didn't even bother bringing Bin Laden back after they supposedly took his ass out. They just dumped him in the fucking ocean. But you're telling me that, right, they're fucking concerned about getting a body home in space. It doesn't make sense and I'm tired of it.